By the way, you're going to edit the video, right? So now, although it's recording, but then you're going to edit it later. Okay, yeah, so we can talk.
Not. He's just going to post it as is.
I'm gonna make sure to put the most embarrassing stuff at the very beginning of the video. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Academy of Management Review's Origin series, where we ask the question, where does theory come from? My name is Rich McAdock. I'm your host, and I'm also an associate editor at AMR, as well as a professor of management at Purdue University's Krannert School of Management. My guests for today are Natarajan Balasubramanian, Yang Yi, and Mingtao Xu, who are authors of a forthcoming AMR article called Substituting Human Decision-Making with Machine Learning, Implications for Organizational Learning. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you,
Rich, for hosting.
Great. Well, first of all, congratulations on your paper being accepted for publication in AMR. It is a great paper, and I look forward to seeing it in print. Let me just start off by asking you to just give a brief overview of the paper to the audience, like a brief 2-minute elevator pitch for the paper. What is the paper about?
So this paper is about how organizational learning can be influenced by the emergence of machine learning. So as we know that organizational learning is an important phenomenon. It's been studied extensively, both from a theoretical perspective and from an empirical perspective. And it's also important from a practical point of view because it has implications for how organizations perform at the end of the day. So our main argument in this paper is that organizational learning is inherently very rich and diverse because it's got this human ability and human talent at the bottom of it all. And when organizations substitute human decision-making with machine learning, which is happening extensively across many different kinds of organizations today, there is a risk that we end up reducing that inherent richness and diversity of learning inherent in organizational learning.
And what would you say could be the consequences of that? What are the risks specifically?
So we outline a number of risks in the paper, but broadly they all relate to what's called myopia of learning, in the sense that the organizations end up overweighting decisions and factors that are in the short term, which is myopia in the temporal sense. Then we talk about myopia in the spatial sense, where organizations risk missing interdependencies across different parts of the organization because machine learning algorithms tend to be very narrow. We also talk about how organizations may potentially risk overlooking extreme outcomes, where organizations fail to see either the possibility of an extreme failure, because often machine learning algorithms are trained on data sets that are relying on averages, that are shown of outliers or some extreme cases that you could see in real life, and they could potentially also miss seeing extreme successes. So again, the data sets are and the algorithms are potentially at risk of missing some of those outlier cases.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. So who would you say is the target audience for this paper?
So again, Mingtao and Yang, feel free to chime in. In my view, the audience would be anybody who's interested in learning, of course, in organizational learning and management. But we also have, I think, a practitioner sort of an element to it at the end of the paper, in the second half of the paper, where it highlights the potential risks. And we talk about what organizations can do from a practitioner perspective. And we highlight the role of governance, especially to address some of these issues. And one of the roles, or one of the important aspects in governance, is also understanding where the data come from. So it's not just an algorithm that runs and we as organizations blindly use the output of that, but understanding where the data comes from and what causes the variation that eventually gives rise to these coefficients and statistical results.
Right, and
Right.
also I think like we're trying to sell the paper to the audience that we generally call the AI and strategy. So although it's not a kind of very long history interest group of the Academy of SMS, but I think there's a growing interest among scholars about the interface between AI and strategy. How are the machine learning and AI affecting and changing, transforming the organizations routines, the governance, etc. So I think for AI and strategy, there isn't a very specific theoretical stream that the people follow, unlike the RBV or dynamic capabilities. However, this as a phenomenon, there are many interfaces between AI and strategy. People can study about strategic human capital. People can study about, for example, in our case, organizational learning, and in this case, we are addressing the question about organizational learning, and especially we are trying to emphasize a little bit of the dark side of AI or machine learning. So we have known about the good stuff about AI, how will that help organizations, but also are there any situations, are there any contexts that we need to kind of be more cautious or pay extra attention to when applying AI or ML to organizations? So AI and strategy people, I think, is one of audiences.
Sure. And apart from, I think, to the organizational learning scholar or scholars who are interested in learning or in machine learning organizations, I think we can also speak to the scholars who are interested in new technology, because there are lots of new technologies and it fundamentally changes the way we do tasks in organizations. And they definitely bring a lot of benefits to the organizations. However, like there are differences in different types of technologies. Like we highlight the machine learning differs from other technology in terms of they can inference of rule and it has a great autonomy. This makes the this can like do a lot of benefits. For example, it can substitute human tasks and it can speed up decision making, but it could also bring these risks. And these risks are very important because machine learning have been increasingly adopted by many organizations like small business and large business, hospitals and policies. Not every one of them have the resources and capabilities to fully understand how machine learning indeed works and what are the risks associated with machine learning. So I think at this stage, we are focusing more on the risk side of machine learning because we want to help the scholars who are interested in new technology or practitioners in the business to understand how we can build governance mechanisms to help mitigate the risk so that we can better take full advantage of the new technology like machine learning.
So you mentioned governance mechanisms as a potential way to mitigate these risks. Are there other ways to mitigate the risks? Are there maybe technological ways to mitigate the risks? Are there ways to do machine learning differently so that the risks are less likely in the first place?
So we think that to mitigate the risk of machine learning, the most important thing is to preserve this diversity. And the diversity largely comes from human. And so like, for example, if you substitute some simple tasks, which like the machine learning is usually very good at, we think that in this way, you substitute the tasks which a lot of diversity could come from, although that diversity may render a low efficiency or other things, but diversity itself could be very useful because in the future, what if the context has changed, then some no efficient routine could be very high efficient. So we should preserve this diversity. In this way, we suggest that maybe we can having more human intervention in the tasks which can be fully substituted by machine learning, or we can build some knowledge sharing mechanism or routines within the organization, so that to encourage the organizations to preserve the knowledge, not just solely reliance on machine learning.
Right. And also, I think recently we have a explainable AI or XAI. I think that's a growing group of scholars working in the AI domain. They're trying to see what is the best way can we kind of open the so-called black box of complicated algorithms and to make those algorithms explainable, understandable for humans. In that way, we could kind of use our knowledge, use our talents, or use our ideas, creativity to complement what has been very computational intensively computed algorithms. So I think that's also a way that, in addition to governance, to have more explainable AI can help with the potential risk that we mentioned in the paper.
So, we call this the AMR Origins series for a reason, because we're interested in understanding the origins of the paper. Our purpose in the series is to demystify the theory development process for the benefit of our readers and for future authors, to help them, learn how to engage in the theory development process themselves. So tell us a little bit about the origins of this paper. Where did this project come from? How did it get started in the first place?
So interestingly, this project started from another failed project. Probably you've had some experience like that. So I was doing an empirical project involving machine learning, and that project never went anywhere. But what I did learn from that exercise was some of the limitations of machine learning algorithms. And that was one. And on the other side, I've always been interested in organizational learning. That was my dissertation. I've done several papers on learning. And one of the things I realized was the machine learning algorithms rely so much on averages. Of course, there are other kinds of machine learning algorithms, but eventually at the end of the day, we are looking at some sort of central tendency or some sort of statistical measure. And we are imposing that one measure or a few measures on the entire data set or on the entire population. So it's pretty much ignoring all the diversity, all the heterogeneity in the data when we are talking about a solution. So from a practical perspective, if you want to think about, say, using a specific kind of drug, so not everybody in the population is going to be responding to the drug effect this equally, because different people respond differently. But you might see a situation where a firm or insurance companies prescribe a specific medicine because it's effective on average, right? And that sort of heterogeneity, of course, it has efficiency benefits and so on, but that's the same thinking that sort of we translated to the routine side. So if you take machine learning and impose this, what I tended to think of as tyranny of averages on the solution, you end up with a solution that's perhaps efficient, but then it creates this very narrow one-dimensional solution that may not work under all the conditions. So that was where we started. The learning perspective was a little bit less dominant at that time. We wanted to explain the routine diversity aspect of machine learning. But as the project evolved, we presented this at a couple of places, and we got great comments from a number of people. And at one point, I think it was Joe Mahoney who suggested maybe you should make this paper more about organizational learning and less about machine learning. So that's how we started thinking more about how to integrate the organizational learning aspect of it beyond just routine diversity.
And what changes did you make in response to that feedback?
So we went back and forth. So before our initial submission, we presented it at a couple of places. It was primarily without a simulation. So right now the paper has a simulation. So we had some initial arguments about how machine learning could reduce routine diversity, but then we went back and and based on some of the feedback, we got into a more detailed simulation to explain, for us to understand more about what we are trying to say in the first place, so we can explain it to people. And I think in that sense, the simulation was very helpful, trying to explain the mechanisms. So that was one important change. And the second important change was going back to the literature and seeing what's the gap in the organizational learning literature, how people have talked about organizational learning in the context of new technology adoption. And we thought there were some gaps there in the theory that we could fill.
So you mentioned that the origin of the paper was in a empirical project that you said that didn't work, and so you were the originator of the idea for the paper. At what point did your co-authors get involved, and how did they get involved?
So they got involved very early on. So once I decided it has to be some sort of theoretical piece, Yang is my first student and my only student so far. She's an awesome work. She does a lot of hard work. She can do the literature reviews so quickly that I can't. There's no way I can catch up with that speed. So then I talked to Yang about this project, and shortly thereafter, when we decided we wanted the simulation in, I'd met Mingtao when I visited Purdue a couple of years ago, and he was very good at some of the simulation work, which I thought would be very useful. And so that's how we sort of put this team together. And he has this inherent interest in AI as well, which you can see he's much more aware of AI trends than I am. And that's sort of how the team got into place.
Okay, so Yang and Mingtao, maybe tell a little bit about your experience in getting involved in the project. What was it like for you, and what was your role?
Okay, so first I want to tell why this project attracts me. So when Natarajan come to me and talk about his idea on this project, I feel very unexpected, and because when we talk about AI or machine learning, we may focus on some benefits of machine learning, such as it speed up decision making, increase the efficiency, and we also aware of some drawbacks such as overfitting or black boxing. So like my thinking before Natarajan talks to me, my thinking about machine learning stopped there. Now, when Natarajan talks to me, and he said, okay, what if when machine learning substitute human learning, actually these kind of features could fundamentally change the organizational learning process, because all the organizational process, like the theory itself, it starts with when human be the primary actors in generate the knowledge or transfer the knowledge. Now, if there is another actor, the machine learning, how does this process change? I think this is an unexpected and interesting question to me, because I never think in this way. And once I think in this way, I realized this is a meaningful project, because as time goes by, as we dig deeper into how human learning differs from machine learning, then we start to realize that this is very meaningful, because they indeed fundamentally different from each other. That makes them have a different impact on the two important factors in organizational learning process. One is the knowledge, and another is the routine. So I think this this project makes me feel that at this point of time, we interested in machine learning not because this is a hot phenomenon, but this phenomenon itself changes many how we can improve or modify the many organizational theories, not just the organizational learning. So it makes me think in this way.
Great. How about you, Mingtao? What got you interested enough in this project?
Yeah, I'll make perhaps 3 points. The first was about my kind of personal interaction with Natarajan. Then it was my previous knowledge about AI or ML. Then about the idea. So the first point, I want to do a promotion to Rich's other series of the Strategy Scholar Pro Seminar series, because Natarajan was one of the earliest speakers when there was in-person seminars who came to Purdue to talk, and then we get to know each other and talk about research ideas from them. So then this round of interaction was actually a direct outcome of our previous communication on research ideas. So we know that we have some expertise and potentially can be complementary. We share some common interest. The second, I'm very excited, energetic, and very interested in AI and technology. And I personally am involved in some other projects related to AI, implementations of AI or ML. And then, so I've always wanted to write something about AI. However, it was not my area of study. So I was in my dissertation stage, and my dissertation was on another topic, which is patent trolls and patent litigations. So this was just an interest of me. So bringing an interest to a paper is a really phenomenal experience. Your interest should cost you something, but instead it brought you something. Second. So the third point about this paper, especially, so I several years back, I heard from another scholar that we would like to study more about the failures or the reasons behind the failures. We have been studying successes, we have been studying why things work so well in so many different dimensions, but we rarely studies how things might fail, especially for companies, for organizations, since we don't observe the failures in those cases. So in this paper, although it's not an empirical paper, but we try to bring to people's attention that, we all know AI can do tons of good things to organizations, but, do we have some circumstances where they can cause potentially failure of organizations? Because when I was doing internet search, there were just tons of failure examples that we just see that on news day by day, right? So then this idea is also very interesting. So like from all the dimensions, I think this is a great project. And then I'm very glad I'm in part of it. So then I was first doing the simulation, then I was going back to review the paper to catch up with Yang and Natarajan on organizational learning. Then I can also contribute on the theory. So then we three have been in very constant interactions. That was great.
Good. Well, so do you have any advice or insights based on your experience of working together about how to develop a theoretical contribution as a team? So, often people may think about a theoretical contribution as something that, springs forth from the theorist's head, completely formed, right? And it's, it comes from a theorist. But in fact, perhaps most theoretical contributions are team efforts. So what can we learn from your experience about developing a theoretical contribution as a team?
I agree with you that the perception is that the theory comes out like it's an abstract thing and people just expound. But based on our experience, and we have this great team with set of complementary skills. Each of us is, I think, good at different things. I think what I found the most beneficial was taking that initial idea, which was probably very bare bones concept, and developing it. And I think that's where the usefulness of a team comes into play. And that's where I think having complementary skills comes into play. So Yang, I think, was able to dig into the literature quite deeply and think carefully about how our very, very bare bones theory can fit into the broader scheme of things. And I think Mingtao's skills in simulation, I think, helped us understand much more clearly what our idea is. So taking that very bare bones idea and writing a simulation, even though it's a very simple simulation, I think taught us quite a bit about how it works. And in addition to, of course, our hours of discussions, I think we spent numerous hours discussing each of the points as we went along. And I think having a team with different sets of skills and different set of expertise, I think helps sort of flesh the ideas out much more clearly than an individual, for sure, I would have been able to do, or perhaps even in each of us individually would have been able to do.
Either of the co-authors want to comment on that question?
I think apart from the complementary skills, I think another thing I really enjoy in working in this team is we have a frequent interaction. Like during the review process, we schedule a Skype call like almost every day, and because we work in a different time zone, so it's like every day I got in the morning I received something from Natarajan, and then I work it in the day, and then I send to Natarajan and Mingtao, and they work when they got off. So I think like it makes us to keep a small progress day and day. And after the discussing, we are very clear what stage we are in. So I think the frequent interaction and the communication really helps.
Right? In other words, like we are all workaholics, so that we are similar-minded people. Then you're right. I think it's great to have a team with complementary skills, and it's absolutely it's not sufficient, but I think it's necessary. However, I think another thing that I really enjoy was that, you know, for the same point, for the same proposition, say a simple proposition that we are considering, so we can understand, explain that in different dimensions. So we have double check ourselves. So I didn't know, to be honest, didn't know much about the literature. The accumulation of literature, of course, Yang and I are much better than that. But then I have some more formal interpretations of some propositions and have perhaps some context to apply those propositions. Then my points can kind of hit the counterpoint made by Natarajan or Yang. So then we have a self-correcting team, so that we are not biased to one direction.
That sounds like it's really important. So tell us a little bit about what the challenges of executing this project. What were the biggest challenges that you faced in executing this project, and how did you overcome those challenges, either individually or as a team?
I think I'll focus on the issues and challenges we faced once it's submitted. Not to say that that's specific to the AMR, but I think we submitted. We got the paper done, we submitted it, and that was, in my opinion, the easy part. And then we got the reviews, and the reviews were very constructive. I've never seen a set of reviews that constructive in all my 15 papers before, or 10 papers before. So they're very constructive, but they were very challenging in the sense that we got a set of reviewers that were the experts at 3 different things. So there was one reviewer who was very interested in machine learning itself. So that reviewer perhaps was very familiar with how machine learning algorithms work, and so on. Then we got a reviewer who was not quite bought into the story that machine learning is going to change anything significantly. And then we had a reviewer who thought machine learning will have some significant impact, but they were interested more on the risks and some of the more current literature and management on machine learning. So we had these 3 different audiences almost, and at many points, I think the challenge was trying to address the concerns, of course, but also to write a paper that sounds coherent enough. And it looks like it's been put together as a whole rather than 3 different pieces that have been sort of targeted 3 different reviewers. And this particularly, so again, that was one of the main reasons why we were meeting almost every day. And there were serious differences within our team about how to handle it. And I think that was part of the learning experience for me as well. It's a tremendous learning experience working on a paper like this. And this was particularly an issue in the second round of reviews for us, where I think there was a stark dichotomy between what one reviewer was suggesting and what another reviewer was suggesting. And there was no way to directly address those. But we did come up with a solution, and that solution shows up as a contingency section in the paper today. So instead of just saying yes or no, we then put it as a whole section that says, okay, depending on these conditions, it could be more a yes or more a no. So rather than being dichotomous, we are a lot more nuanced in our approach. So the review process was a very enriching experience. I think at least in my opinion, it tremendously improved the paper from that initial idea, and certainly from the initial submission. It's a significant improvement, and we hope that the readers find that to be so.
Mingtao or Yang, do either of you have a different perspective on the challenges that you faced?
So speaking of challenges, I think immediately popped to my mind. I'm saying with Natarajan, I'm thinking about the reviewing process. So writing about a draft is not that difficult compared to addressing the other comments and challenges. So I think we still underestimated there is a very low commonality among people towards some very fundamental concepts. And our understanding, although I call them self-correcting, but still we are biased. And we thought that we explained something really well. We thought that that should be self-revealing, but actually it's not. And actually, in this area of AI and organization learning, or AI and strategy, so it's not like RBV, something that when you mention the word, people knows what you're talking about. People knows about these concepts, these words. It's not like in principles of economics. But then in this domain, so many things are quite ambiguous and opaque, and we have to explain things to the very fundamental detail, the rationale that scholars, our audience, they can understand. It's our kind of responsibility, and it's actually helped us a lot. I learned so much from this whole process about what are the true important theoretical constructs and how are we really fitting into the gap in the literature. How are we connecting the organizational learning literature with the emerging AI studies? So I think this is really something that kind of forced us to move forward and think deeper about that.
True. And I think we indeed have these challenges, but at the same time, the reviewers' comments are very helpful. Like they point out several things we need to address, but also they point out the directions we can pursue in order to address these kind of questions. So I think in this process, we think how to address their answers, or like thinking in the ways where different reviewers in different backgrounds may question the story, or it helps us to clarify what we indeed think about this story, or what indeed lies in between. They ask a lot of how, in the first draft we briefly mentioned the difference in human learning and the machine learning, but we didn't make it so clear that how the two fundamentally differs from each other. So I think the reviewers actually help us to clarify that if we want to make a theoretical contributions, we need to very clearly think about how the theory proposed about the differences in the two, and how we can build into the previous theories.
And Rich, if I may add a couple of quick comments. In addition to the reviewers, I think the editor, Joel Baum, was also really important. His role was also really important in helping us sort of understand these very diverse set of comments, if you will, and helping us think about how we could address it. And again, his comments, in addition to the review team's comments, were very, very helpful in moving the paper forward. And in some ways, I see it as sort of confirming the message of this paper, right? So we had this initial idea, which is between the three of us, and then you have this other three or four people including Joel. So it's a more diverse set of perspectives, and the paper is so much richer for it compared to what it was started with, and compared to the original bare bones idea I had way back. It certainly I think confirms this benefit of diversity of perspectives and thinking.
Indeed. So my last question is actually 5 questions in one, which is, my question is, what future impact do you hope that this paper will have? And I'll break that down into 5 parts. What impact do you hope it will have on future theory, on future theory, on future empirics, on future practice, on future pedagogy, and on future policy? Those are kind of the 5 ways I think of an AMR paper might have impact: theory, empirics, practice, pedagogy, and policy. So what impacts do you hope this paper will have in those areas?
Okay, that's certainly a lot of questions there. So let me take the future practice and future policy together. I think on that dimension, our main contribution, our main thought is that the adoption of machine learning has some significant risks. People have talked about many risks, and people are highlighting many of the risks of machine learning. But what we are doing a little bit more carefully or more deeply, certainly, is the impact on organizational learning, and thinking about how that affects organizational routine diversity, so diversity of routines or variation of routines in the organization, and how that might eventually affect organizational learning. So in that sense, I think our main sort of contribution for practice and policies, being careful about these potential risks and thinking about mechanisms that could potentially alleviate this. They could be governance, they could be data-based solutions or algorithm-based solutions, etc. So that's that. In terms of theory, again, Mingtao, Yang, feel free to pitch in. I thought there were two broad areas we could have worked on, we could contribute to, and we hope that future researchers can take that. So one is the focus on organizational learning and organizational myopia of learning. So people have worked extensively on myopia of learning, and this could be another way of looking at it, another source of myopia, if you will. So we hope that there's something that's there. And the second is, again, on the machine learning side. So scholars are beginning to look at the organizational consequences of machine learning, and we hope this can help develop or contribute to development of theory on that front. From an empirical standpoint, we have put forth a number of propositions. We give some number of ideas in the paper. So our hope would be that someone finds it interesting enough and informative enough to start testing some of those propositions, either with data or with experiments. And lastly, I think you said pedagogy. Hopefully people use this in their PhD seminars as a great example of a well-written theory paper.
No doubt about that.
Thanks. And so I think one thing that's novel about our paper is this combined use of simulation and verbal arguments. I think most of the papers that we had read was either solely verbal arguments or almost centrally driven by the simulation. And here we have this simulation with, we have verbal arguments with a little bit of simulation to sort of clarify that. And that could hopefully give some ideas to budding scholars and researchers.
So I will add something to the theory part. I think apart from the myopia side, like future theories in organizational learning can continue working on. So I think another thing is our paper also discussed the whole learning process. So in the learning process, like we focus on the reduction in the routine diversity and the reduction in the knowledge richness. So actually there is some other things. For example, in the organizational literature, there is a group of scholars who are interested in knowledge depreciation. Now, in the traditional learning, when human is the main actor, the knowledge depreciation naturally comes from when the people or employees leave the organization or they forget something. Now, if we use technology such as machine learning to substitute humans, it seems that they don't have such a problem that if the people leave, the technology is still there, so the knowledge is still there. But we point out, actually, they have another risk of knowledge depreciation because the machine learning itself will reduce the knowledge richness. They didn't tell you how they make the decision. They just makes the prediction itself, and the humans are very hard to understand or even interpret the result. So there is a warning on the knowledge depreciation process. And also we can think about something like future study can work on the a knowledge transformation across the organization, because there are some other technologies such as cloud machine learning, which enable some small firms, even they do not have the capabilities of doing machine learning in-house, but they can using some existing algorithms and apply them to their own business. So in this way, actually knowledge gets transferred from some other companies to the smaller and less capable companies. But however, we may focus on, or future research actually can focus on, like associated with this knowledge transfer, is there any other problems? Like if the recipient of this knowledge just taking this technology as a tool, they have ignorance of the risks associated with the new technology. It could bring some new problems. So there are some other future avenues we can enter into the machine learning in organizational learning setting.
Right. So I'll start with the 3 Ps. I'll start with the practice and policy first. I think I think practice and policy, they're like one of them we can imagine as companies or organizations who are really using AI in policy. Can be thinking about regulators. So in a very classic context, let's say the policymaker, the FDA, and they are regulating the medical device companies who are using software to diagnose diseases. Then from the practice point of view, I would like to know what are the aspects where I need to pay attention to our algorithms. And then, sometimes are we talking about sensitivity or specificity, and then what may cause our algorithm to failure in the business world, let's say, and then what can be the causes of that? So why did we do something wrong? Did we, because of the lower diversity, because we ignore the long run, because we ignore the experience or the needs, because of the nescience of the algorithm itself, something like that for practitioners to know. And then on the other side of coin, then for the policy side, then of course we need, from the regulators' point of view, from policymakers' point of view, when we observe such a adoption of replacement or substitution of AI with substitution of AI and human decision making, we want to pay attention to those risks that we are mentioning in this paper. So what about the nescience? What about this reduction of the routine diversity? And then are these two serious issues in some scenarios? Will they causing problems? I think if something in this, among these propositions can be fully considered before the really adoption of some algorithms, perhaps many of those kind of epic failures could be avoided. Then because of its meaningfulness in practice and policy, so this pedagogy meaning just naturally come out, because it's important for people to know about that. So then it's important for us scholars to teach us something about that, or just to inform some people that there are such risks. Perhaps you want to take a read at some paper. Not only, of course, the paper, I hope that should be included in a PhD seminar, but also when we are teaching other agents, other parties in this world. So I think it's important to inform them, let them know. Then from a theory and empirics point of view, I think for theory point of view, I think because we have been running through a lot of, we are trying to bridge these two literature. One is very established from Simon's learning literature, and then it's very new, the AI literature. So we are perhaps placing the first brick on building this bridge. However, we need much more work to expand on. So what are the other interactions? So we are talking about organizational learning, but then there are other interfaces like governance or the CEO decision-making. We haven't been talking about, more upper level decision-making or lower level decision-making. We have touched a little bit on the more complex or versus more simple decision-making, but then what are the more, but we are talking at a very high level, but what are the really fundamental stuff that we can link to the strategy organizational literature? I think for theory, we can basically pick a proposition in this paper and then try to apply that to relate to another organizational literature. Then for empirics, I think we have mentioned many different ways we can test perhaps of the propositions. Perhaps I won't say that doing empirics is easy, perhaps it's very difficult, because it's very hard to find the counterfactuals in this case. But then in fact, if we, for some situations, if some of us, we are lucky that we found a scenario or an incident or a natural experiment that you can see, there's exogenous shock in some of the dimensions that we mentioned in our paper, then perhaps that's a first sparkling of some empirical papers.
Very good. Well, I'm out of questions. So let me just say thank you all three of you, for joining me today for this episode of the AMR Origin series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you so much, Rich. Thanks.